gonna go off video for a split second.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm Jill Dossi, Senior Curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, and we are thrilled to welcome Riva Lehrer this evening. We had so looked forward to Riva's visit to San Diego, and unfortunately that didn't prove possible, but it gives us the opportunity to do a good old-fashioned Zoom lecture and hopefully open up the audience, a bit more for this talk. I want to be sure to mention and to thank Deaf Community Services of San Diego for providing ASL interpretation on the screen today. And in the webinar, you'll also see at the bottom of the screen an option to toggle on closed captioning. So those two options, and feel free to, ask any questions. You can put questions, technical questions in the chat, and then I'll introduce our guest and have a conversation. And so we will, at the end, take questions from the audience and those you would want to post in the Q&A. So without further ado, Riva Lehrer is an artist, writer, and curator who focuses on the socially challenged body. She is best known for representations of people whose physical embodiment, sexuality, or gender identity have long been stigmatized. I perhaps haven't said already that Lehrer's work is on view at the Museum of Contemporary Art as part of our exhibition For Dear Life, Art, Medicine, and Disability. And in the wonderful catalog entry in the book that accompanies the exhibition, the curator and art historian Elizabeth Rookledge writes, in her strikingly realistic paintings and drawings, Lehrer disrupts the historical function of portraiture as a vehicle for communicating the status and power of those in normative bodies by positioning disabled people as worthy subjects. She asserts, and this is a quote from Riva herself, "It was imperative to get out of my own way in the service of depicting non-normative beauty. The way I render bodies strikes some as conservative and literal-minded. For me, it's an ethical stance in which I try to bring the body forward as directly as possible." So we're going to talk more about Riva's ethics of portraiture. Lehrer's work has been featured in venues including the National Portrait Gallery of the Smithsonian, Yale University, the United Nations, the National Museum of Women of the Arts. Sorry, I will slow down as I go through this long list. That's in Washington, D.C. The DeCordova Museum, the Frye Museum, the Chicago Cultural Center, and the State of Illinois Museum. And of course, it's on view here in San Diego. Lehrer has received numerous awards, including a 2017 McDowell Fellowship for writing, a 2015 Three Arts Residency Fellowship at the University of Illinois, the 2014 Carnegie Mellon Fellowship at Haverford and Bryn Mawr Colleges, the 2009 Prairie Fellowship at the Ragdale Foundation, and she's received grants that include the 2008 Three Arts Foundation Grant and the 2006 Wynne Newhouse Award for Excellence, numerous others. Lehrer is on the faculty at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and an instructor in the Medical Humanities departments of Northwestern University. Her memoir, Golem Girl, was published by the One World imprint of Penguin Random House in October 2020. And if you haven't read it, well, you'll hear from Riva tonight, but I also really recommend the audiobook version because it's just so wonderful to hear the book read in Riva's own voice, as we are fortunate to do tonight. So Riva, I will turn it over to you since I've been talking for a long time now and we want to hear from you.
Mute myself, apparently I was muted. These things happen. Okay, so thank you everybody for coming. I was so looking forward to being there with you, and the combination of the fire situation and disability chaos kind of took that out of the running. But I can kind of be with you tonight. I'm here, count me present. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read from the memoir, aforementioned Golem Girl. This is the actual, are you guys seeing it backwards?
No.
Melog, Rolig, I don't know what it looks like from your end, but it is, the actual book is almost a catalog raisonné of my work. There's like 65 images in it. And so I'm going to read from it. And so since this is a museum event and we're talking about my portraiture, I wanted to choose two pieces that were particularly germane in the history of my portraiture. And the first one is from a chapter called Portrait of Dorian Gray. All of the chapter headings in the book are taken from horror movies or novels, short stories, things like that, because the book is about my life as a monster. And I'm not being facetious. The background of that chapter is that I had gone to art school at University of Cincinnati originally, and then School of the Art Institute after that. And particularly while I was in Cincinnati, I was heavily discouraged from making any work about impairment. I was very lost as a person. I didn't really know what I wanted to be as an artist. I knew I loved art, but couldn't really get past that. And anything I wanted to do was just more than discouraged. I was told I would never have a career whatsoever. And later, curators told me the same thing. Critics, collectors, gallerists, you name it. They all said, well, you have talent, but stop making these pictures. You're not going to get anywhere. So it was in that state of grief and despair. I'd done some work, but I really wasn't showing it, that this next thing happened. So let me bring up my text and put on the reading glasses. And so, like I said, this chapter is called Picture of Dorian Gray. I'm gonna synopsize a little bit in a few places, but it's Chicago Spring, 1994. I was flipping through a catalog for the Anderson Ranch Art Center when a painting caught my eye. It was titled Mea Corpa by Bailey Dugan. I had just seen her work during historian Joanna Fru's lecture at the College Art Association conference not a month earlier, and had been utterly taken by Dugan's toughness and honesty. The catalog listed a 2-week workshop at Anderson Ranch, quote, painting the psychological self-portrait. My own work had been stalled out for months. This felt like a sign. Snowmass, Colorado, summer 1994. Anderson Ranch is a sprawling collection of studios, administration buildings, and cabins clinging to the side of a mountain just above Aspen, itself a virtual Scandinavia, populated with statuesque, 6-foot-tall blondes and their 7-foot-tall mates all brandishing skis like Viking spears. It was weird. It was summer. Couldn't quite understand that. I stood at a grocery checkout and felt like a hobbit. The ranch's parking lot was paved with plum-sized gravel, the absolute worst possible surface for my orthopedic shoes. I couldn't even get out of my car. A passing carpentry instructor stopped and saw that I was stranded, ran to his workshop, and came back with a rough cane that let me gingerly hobble to the cabins. I was in line in the cafeteria when a slight and rangy woman appeared at my elbow. Bailey Dugan was all hollow cheeks, tea-brown eyes, and feline jaw. Her graying waist-length braid twitched like a puma's tail. She drawled, "You're Riva, aren't you? I saw you during orientation. Call me Peggy." Over dinner, quote, "Call me Peggy," told tales from our days as an advertising illustrator on the Morton Salt account, where she had modernized the "When it rains, it pours" logo. Later, she showed me drawings of Joanna Frew as a very lewd umbrella girl. And just parenthetically, I would not have been able to go to Anderson Ranch if Peggy had not given me a discount on the fee that she was charging. I was very poor, and Anderson Ranch gave me a partial scholarship, but it was really Peggy being kind and allowing me into her class that let what happened happen. 7 a.m. in the mountains. Mist scumbled the hill behind my cabin. I sipped coffee and watched a vixen carry her kits through the beaded grass, then grabbed my box of Cheerios and headed for the dining hall. Cheapo cereal was going to have to sustain me for the next 2 weeks. I got directions to the converted garage that served as the painting studio. Peggy was taping brown paper over the windows, and I thought, that's odd. Don't studios need lots of light? 10 students had signed up for the seminar, 8 white women, 7 blonde, 1 brunette, 1 black male nurse, also from Chicago, and me. Peggy explained the reason for the covered windows. We were all going to take off our clothes and paint ourselves in the nude. The blood drained from my head as if I'd been guillotined. How had I missed this? Did everyone know this but me? The 8 white women all looked delighted. All that Nordic track hadn't been for naught. Chicago guys seemed stoic. Nurses, I supposed, were professionally copacetic with nudity. I had spent a hell of a lot of time, effort, and money getting here, but no way was I stripping off. The psychological self-portrait indeed. Hieronymus Bosch could not have designed a tidier hell. I waffled and panicked and waffled some more, even as I claimed my own easel, cabaret, and standing mirror. Peggy went around the room helping people set up. When she reached me, I pulled her down and whispered in her ear that for me, naked was the 7 seconds a day between stepping out of the shower and into my panties. Peggy nodded a brisk, right, let's find an answer to this, and helped me design a cabana out of sheets, towels, rope, and clothespin. Just enough space to remove my clothing as long as I remembered not to lean against the carry cloth walls. I was all too aware that my naked feet, with their contracted pes cavus arches, were exposed between the edges of the towels. I had nowhere to run. The mirror was inches from my skin. But by day 3, I had simply become a series of abstract problems to be solved, as questions of measurement, color, and texture took over. I became an object, an animal, a subject in need of observation, and nothing more. I let my brushwork track the convolution of scars and asymmetry of bones. Peggy circled the studio, instructing and correcting, and when she got to me, I muttered, wait a minute, sorry, and threw on my t-shirt and shorts. She couldn't see my body, so she could only guess as to whether what I painted was real. Acrylic paint is removed with dabs of isopropyl alcohol. This made my impromptu exam room smell like a hospital. And in a moment, I'm going to bring up this image, but I'll finish the text. I stand in a bare room. A torn window shade casts a circle of light. My hands claw the wall. A compass rose flares on my belly, and the title is Corner, Terra Incognita. Terra Incognita is Latin for unknown lands. During the 15th and 16th golden age of exploration, aka golden age of colonialism, Dutch map makers illustrated the uncharted areas on maps with monsters. Blank lands abounded with centaurs, with dog-headed cyanomogli, with headless blemmies who wore their faces on their bellies, with monopods who stomped about on a single elephantine leg. The seas were full of mermen and mermaids and coiled sea serpents, and monsters were the scions of xenophobia, warnings that people who weren't like us weren't people at all. It takes me months to finish a painting. In September, I brought the panel, still in progress, to my advanced painting class at the School of the Art Institute. SAIC was several steps up from DAA, but you wouldn't have known it that day. My professor complained, "Your tight brush marks are a form of dishonesty. Let me see your hand move. Loosen up, use a gestural stroke, then you'll really reveal yourself." Showing myself scarred and scared wasn't candid enough for him. He was wrong. I had no more secrets. I was able to go forward because I had done my worst. And let me get to our images and show you. And that's the cover of my book again. And this is the painting. Oh, whoops, screen share. Riva. I am not the most graceful at zooming. Let's go back here, let's share. And here we are. This is the painting. It's now in collection on the East Coast. But I cannot tell you what a difficult experience it was making this work. And I'll just briefly, well, when I show you my images, we'll go back and see my book cover, but I'm stopping sharing now. So Jill, that is the beginning of my adventure as an actual artist. And Peggy Dugan completely changed my life. I barely had the chance to describe her there. Her work is spectacularly brilliant. And she's about to have a retrospective, I believe, in New York. Her daughter may be on this Zoom. So Moira, if you can drop into the chat, perhaps, where Peggy's retrospective may be about to be held, I would love that. But she was really the person who brought me out of my terror into Terra, from
Right.
Terra to Terra.
And that work, Terra Incognita, excuse me, from 1990, it's 1991, right?
Whatever it said on the slide.
Whatever it said on the screen, I was taking
Early ass 90s.
it is reproduced in our catalog, and in a wonderful essay by Amanda Kasha, the curator and art historian. So when you receive the catalog, Riva, you will see it. But it's nice to have it represented there, because it's this, this kind of, I don't know, Rosetta Stone piece for you, or it's, it really leads to so much more. So can you talk about where your work went after this? I was also so interested in this idea of being honest with your work, because I think in the book you go on to talk about, finally changing the scale of your work, that you had been working on a much smaller scale, and that for you that kind of represented this attempt to hide even, and so, yeah, I would love to hear more about that process.
Well, I had mostly been doing paintings that were highly encoded. I had started by making work about lesbian desire. And to my astonishment, that was much more acceptable at the time than anything about disability. So my first reputation was doing that. But even that was hard for me because it was about facing my own body at a certain level. Having desire at all was not okay for people with disabilities. So painting about desire, even if I wasn't painting myself, still was pretty scary. So I was doing these very small paintings, and I was mostly asking other people to pose for me. It really wasn't until that piece that I stopped substituting other people for myself. I probably did a little bit more of it later, but what happened with doing that piece and feeling like I could face looking at myself, it's still a little bit of a hard piece for me to look at, even though I've done a lot of nudes since then. That one was, I don't have words for how tough that was, especially when I got to school and absolutely no one would discuss the content whatsoever. They would only talk about formal issues. And I've never painted the way that people are supposed to paint. I'm still not painting the way people are supposed to paint. And so that's all they would talk about. But at least they didn't tell me to knock it off. That was the boon of SAIC, is they didn't actually mostly tell me to stop. But so once I had been able to look at myself, it was just a handful of years later when I was invited, and anyone who's read the book or really even knows me knows this story, that in '97, the brilliant novelist and playwright Susan Nussbaum, whose portrait I did and who's in the book, invited me into this group called the Disabled Artists Coalition, collective, rather. I'd been in so many coalitions and collectives, like lesbians and Cincinnati and women and, I don't know, short people, whatever it was, just so many. And, as I say, they were all so depressing because it was always like, oh, the art world doesn't care for us. Well, we love each other, we're going to support each other, but we're disdained, and oh, woe is us. And when Susan asked me to join this group, I thought, well, that's going to be really a lot of depressed people. I had avoided disabled people since I had left my elementary school, which, very long story. I went to an elementary school entirely for children with disabilities. And then after that, all of my schooling after that was in mainstream, and where I was always the only disabled person, almost always. So it was horrific culture shock. But the disabled people that I did run into on the street or at the hospital all seemed really withdrawn and depressed and antisocial. But bear in mind, like, there weren't curb cuts, there weren't automatic doors, most disabled people were stuck in buildings somewhere, often living in institutions or just really unable to leave their own houses without massive help. Imagine being a power chair user and you can't cross the street. You may not even be able to get on the steps in your building. So by '97, we had the ADA and people were literally coming out. But I still thought of disabled people as the saddest, most pathetic people that I knew. And so Susan invites me to this group and I got my ass kicked. These folk were hilarious. And most importantly, the two important things they did for me, and they were playwrights and dancers and novelists and visual artists and graphic designers, just extremely creative. But the two things they gave me is they helped me laugh. And I have said, for God's sake, I was Jewish and I could laugh at anything, but didn't know how to laugh at disability. They taught me that it was funny, but most importantly, they gave me theory. They gave me language and theory. And, early disability, this was pretty early kind of ish disability theory. And it was certainly early disability culture. I think I'm one of the sort of middle, late first generation uh, innovators of disability culture. And we were tight. You know, we supported each other, we read each other's work, we showed up to each other's performances. And while I was there, I had this hallucinatory experience, really, honest to God. I'm sitting at this table at Victory Gardens Theater. We've got snacks in the middle of the table, and my compatriots are around me. And I've always been obsessed with Northern Renaissance portraiture and early Italian um, uh, portraiture, and or early Renaissance rather. And I started seeing everybody in the room as a different portrait by like everyone from like Petrus Crispus to uh, Leonardo to Vermeer to what there were just aspects of each person that all of a sudden I saw them that way. And I thought, oh my God, I really want to make portraits of these people. I didn't want to do pastiches, you know, so and so as a Leonardo. But it was this really strange hallucination where like they were absolutely themselves and they were also absolutely these astonishingly beautiful portraits in my head. And that was the beginning. But the thing that we all had in common, just about a lot of the stories and the laughing and the jokes and the crying sometime, was about what it meant to be stared at. We were all stared at. And as I've talked about in my work around stigma, my work isn't just about people who are morphologically different, although we can talk about why it tends to center on that. I'm also interested in people who perform their body in a way that creates or enacts stigma towards them. So whether that's how you move, if you have, for instance, a spasticity, if you're very openly gay and you're creating a way of moving that culturally is understood as gay, whether you're any, you know, whether you're gender fluid, whatever you're doing with your body that gets you targeted interests me. But the thing is that for those of us who go through that, being looked at is incredibly painful. So portraiture, as I often say, is this. Could you move a little bit? Okay, could you turn your head a little bit? And I'm staring at you for like hours and days and weeks and months. I'm staring at you. And I'm taking pictures and I'm making drawings and I'm staring at you. And I thought, geez Louise, that is not going to be much fun for these people, because after I had that hallucination, I started asking people to pose for me in that group. I depicted almost everybody. And I had to figure out how not to make that painful. And the answer that came to me that I've been building on for 30 years now, just about, is shared power, autonomy and shared power, and letting go of, even when I've known that something would make a better image, if the person I'm working with flinches in any way, or I suspect that it might be hard for them to see that piece later. People have very complicated and difficult relationships to their own portraits, and it's hard enough when it's a photo. It's a whole other level of hard when it's not a photo. So for all these years, I've been building up these ethical structures of handing over power in a lot of different approaches. And as your essayist touched on, because that's also meant getting out of my own way as a proto-formalist, and not exaggerating the body or overly elaborating it. People back then, they automatically thought, viewers thought I was making my subjects up. I got it all the time. Was that person real? You know, so I wanted to make sure that, yeah, that person was as real as I could make them.
There's so many interesting things you've just said, so I want to touch on a few of them. But one thing I think that's valuable about what you shared with us and the book is that you have this, you get this picture of a disability art movement as it's coalescing and your role in it. And as you say, you were really an innovator of disability culture. And with the exhibition at the museum, one thing we wanted to do was to try to highlight, hubs of disability art and activism in different cities. Chicago clearly was a space where people were coming together. And, by the late 90s, as, disability, like you were talking about having a language, like that's so crucial. And, uh, it seems like all of the work that is happening today wouldn't have, we wouldn't have this momentum without what was set in motion at that moment. So I think it's really helpful the way that even as this is your autobiography, you are telling this history of, a larger movement, and you really get a sense of the players, and so that's wonderful. But another thing I was thinking about just with the exhibition at the museum, so many people have said, oh, well, that sounds like a downer, or that sounds dark, or painful. And as you say, you don't want to make things so painful, and yet, like, there is pain in life. It's also painful to repress the pain and to not acknowledge the pain. And so in the exhibition, I feel like, yes, there's pain, but there's also a lot of humor, and that's what really, I think, also comes through in both your memoir, but also your portraits. And then, coming to this question of ethics, the way in which these portraits are really a collaboration. And actually, what I wondered if you could talk about is a little more about what that process is like. When you're sitting with someone and, working on this over a long period of time. And maybe one direction we can go also is to talk about, you did a portrait of one of the other artists in the show, Hollis Sigler. And I know you were potentially going to read something about Hollis Sigler, and we could talk about her work, but I'll let you, answer what makes sense.
The first thing I want to mention is vis-a-vis the history of the movement. As far as I know, I am the first person to curate a show about people dealing with impairment that was not based in so-called outsider art, because at the time, I mean, look, things have really changed. My ideas have really changed. But back then, one of the other stigmas for doing work about disability was the idea that it was entirely therapeutic, that it was outside the conversation of contemporary art completely. It was only germane to the body of the artist, the body mind of the artist, and might be good for them and cathartic, but wasn't was outside the perimeters. And so it took me 6 years to put together a show that opened in 2006 called Humans Being at the Chicago Cultural Center. I believe it's the first one in the world that was centered on people who had gallery representation, formal training, academic backgrounds, art world reputations, whatever combination, gallery artists, museum artists. And many of the places that I approach, almost all of them, to borrow a work from a collection said, oh no, we're not going to loan that because it'll do damage to the reputation of the artist to be seen in a therapy show. They don't identify as disabled, which I later found out was not true. I tried to borrow Chuck Close at one point, and his gallerist said, His work has nothing to do with disability. Let's all laugh together about that right now. But that's what it was like. It took 6 years of pleading. And then in 2013, I did a follow-up show. We had lost most of our funding. We were at a much smaller space. It was a much smaller scale show, but I did manage to do a second iteration of Humans Being. And then I really wanted to go back to being an artist. Because when you are an artist curator, you disappear as an artist and people just see you as someone who can do things for them. And I burned out on that. But I am proud of doing the first 2 shows that I know of anywhere. And then when I heard about your show, my head exploded. It's like, oh my God, 20 years later, it's coming totally to fruition. It's like, almost exactly 20 years later, I was just completely blown away. And that it's a major museum with all the major players. I mean, this is, for y'all out there, this is a BFD. So, um,
Well, thank you. But I will say that we are building on the work that has been happening continuously since then. So, you did these early shows, and then, art historians, like I talked about Amanda Kasha, Elizabeth Rookledge, there's so many, and,
and
a number of shows on the East Coast with, a younger generation of artists or early career artists who are, exploring disability justice in their work. So, uh,
it's really great.
yeah, we're building on all of that and inheriting it. And so, thank you for that. So, I want to let you talk about Hollis Sigler, but I think the other thing that is so distinctive, you're probably the only artist in the show who has actually worked with medical students and has taught in that kind of setting. So, I don't know if, now's the moment, but it seems like you have your portraits of community, but you have this other, or your community-based practice, but it's collaborative, but you're also working with students in this way, and I'm so interested to hear what that's like.
Um, how are we for time? Shall I talk a little bit about that, then go to Hollis, or what would you like?
It's a good point. We have our interpreters with us till 6:30, so I think we're doing okay on time. So maybe you could answer the question briefly, and then we'll let you read again and talk a bit more and open it up to questions from
I
our.
haven't shown my work either,
Oh,
but
exactly. We want to see your your work. So,
yeah, I've done a few more things than what's in the show.
yeah,
Um, so I mean, I can let the slides run while I answer the medical school question if you want. Why don't I do screen share, and I'm just
sounds
gonna,
good.
without I'm not going to describe anything for the moment. If anyone wants to talk about an image later that doesn't come up, jot down the title, and uh, and we'll talk about it in the Q&A. So I'm going to go back to the slides and just go quickly. Let's see. Okay. So let's see if we can do this. Please. Slideshow. Oh, sorry, I'm going to end up showing slides I didn't want to, but that's life. Okay, we'll go back. So starting with one of the ones that's in the show. So I originally started medical humanities by teaching classes in anatomical self-portraiture, which was this layered approach of building a portrait on multiple layers of mylar, from the bone through the muscle up to the surface anatomy. And then one day I got invited, and by the way, the slides that I am showing, I kept all of the California people whose portraits I've done. So some of these may be people that you know. They're not entirely California people, but there are a lot of them here. So I got invited to visit the cadaver lab, and I was absolutely riveted for 2 reasons. One was well, they ended up inviting me to be visiting artist in the cadaver lab. And it gave me so much more of an understanding of my own life, my surgical life. I'd always been fascinated by anatomy, and all of a sudden I was learning it really at ground zero. And then I had been at University of Illinois at Chicago in their medical humanities program. And then they shut it down in favor of bioethics. And almost immediately I got hired by Northwestern. And while I was teaching at Northwestern, I was again invited into their cadaver lab. And that is where I saw the Ari Krantz collection. And the Ari Krantz collection, which I write a lot about in the book, is it's a collection of anomalous fetuses starting in, I believe, the late 40s. A lot of you guys will know Alice here. Um, anyway, here I'm going to get through these quickly, and then we can go back and talk. By the way, that is Sky Kubako Sky's portrait of me as a garment. The close up on my drawing, collaborative drawing of Sky. And then this is me in the outfit that Sky did as their portrait of me. Forgive me, their portrait of me. And this is my last painting of my partner. So stop share. Anyway, so the Ari Krantz collection was his collection of anomalous fetuses in jars. And my mother had been a medical researcher for Dr. Workany, Joseph Workany, who was one of the founders of teratology, which is the study of what was called birth defects at the time. And so I'd grown up with kids with these conditions. I recognized in these jars people that I would know. And I wanted to do something with that. By then I'd been to the Mutter Museum, which again is part of that whole chapter about my work in medicine, which has a very extensive collection of anomalous fetuses in jars. And at the Mutter, I had seen what I say is myself, which was an infant with my exact disability. And I had never seen that, and I sort of passed out at the museum. So there I am a few years later at Northwestern, and I'm seeing this collection of jars. And I knew I had to do something with them and with this for the students. And it took me a while. And I finally decided what I've been doing is that I get 8 to 10 students a term. I teach them how to draw. They each choose one of the fetal specimens. I don't assign any of them. Some of them we don't move. They're just too big and heavy and fragile. But there are about a dozen that we have to choose from. So my students each choose an anomalous fetus, and I teach them drawing using a rigorous series of logical steps, because these are med students and almost none of them have background in the arts, and they're all scared silly, but they all really want to do a good job because they're med students and they're greyhounds. And so I had to come up with a way that they could learn to draw really quickly. But their last assignment is not drawing. The last day of class, they have to bring me a 15-minute presentation on someone who has lived within roughly the last 25 years with an impairment that is the same or analogous to that of the fetus that they have been drawing. And the point of that is that, as I've written, when you see a medical specimen in a museum or a med school, it's there for one of two reasons. It's either there because it's a condition that no longer exists, and it's look what we managed to cure out of existence. Isn't this weird? Like the specimen at at the Motor Museum of a woman with a horn coming out of her head. That would these days be caught and treated, and it would never happen. Or the implication is, as with the plaster cast of Chang and Eng, that, well, this will happen, but we can treat it, or we're going to cure it out of existence. So it's never about the lived body. It's never about now. It's always about the body as a tragedy. And so I wanted them to find people who had presences in the world and talk about them, whether they had founded a career, written a book, were the subject of a documentary, whatever, lots of different ways to enter into a biography. And I've talked to my students, and they've said that it has really changed, at least while they're in my class. It's changed their ideas about disability, what they would say to a prospective parent or a new patient. I've done a lot more since then, working with people in medicine directly to address medical audiences about the fact that we are not tragedies. But it's always the same fight. It's always the message that I give is, ask your patient, what is the life you're trying to live? And how can our work together bring you to a place where you can live that life as closely as possible? And it's, they don't think that way, most of them.
Well, in so many ways, you're giving them, like you talk about when you first came into contact with, a community of disabled people and you found language. You are, I mean, as you were speaking, I was thinking, okay, you're defining what we refer to as the medical model of disability, that this is a condition in need of a cure. It is, something that is, specific to the individual as opposed to in, the society that doesn't accommodate uh, non-normative bodies of all kinds. So yeah, I mean, it's incredible. But you're teaching them to see. So this goes back to the question, to this idea of ethics also, and uh, what it means to depict another person and to look at another person and to perceive another person. And maybe this is a good note on which to have you read again about a specific person. Yeah.
First off, I forgot to mention I was the professor of anatomy at the School of the Art Institute for at least a decade. I've done a lot of study in anatomy, and I'm writing a book right now where I'm back looking at, oh, wrong glasses, so many glasses. So I did have a few chops to be doing this. Okay, so one of the artists in your show is Hollis Sigler. I don't know if you want to say a word or two about Hollis before I read this section. Jill?
Well, I think it would be helpful to, to show the image, but Sigler was a painter based in Chicago, and I think was known for her, just the unflinching honesty of her work in, making pictures that had to do with, with her queer identity, but also as someone who lived with breast cancer and went through treatment and remission, and made a lot of work about that. And that's the work that we have in the show. We have a piece called "I'd Make a Deal with the Devil" from 1996, and it's a remarkable picture where she's really thinking about the life of being being an artist in the studio, and an artist living with an illness.
Here it is.
So yes, thank you.
Yes, I mean, she was completely an innovator. Nobody was doing this. And she also got tremendous pushback when she first started making work about breast cancer. But
And I'm
I'm
not seeing it on the screen. Are other people, or is that just my screen?
I'm seeing it as a share. Do people see it or not?
I am not, and it sounds like the PowerPoint may be uh, glitching or stuck.
Those you are screen sharing. Let me try and stop share again. Do it again. All right, share. PowerPoint. Do you see it yet?
I'm seeing the same thing.
What are you saying?
And I think the suggestion is to unshare and reshare, but I think you just did that.
I did. I will quit PowerPoint and see if um, that helps anything. Hopefully, I won't quit us. My apologies. I've never had this happen before. I have to come back and find this and get to here and slideshow. Oh, I hate that it does this. Sorry, people. Okay, now back to Zoom and see if I can, come on. And share again. And I don't know which one. Let's try this. Did that work?
Yes, thank you. Great.
Okay, here's the image that you guys have in your show. I'm going to stop share now. I'm going to read the part, and then the final image will be my portrait of Hollis. And I'll go as fast as I can. Okay. Come back. And then that shut down. Oh, golly. Great. Great, folks. Okay, here we go. Okay, so just to back up 1 second. My early work in disability, the first project I ever did was called Circle Stories. And it was 10 portraits of people in the arts who had disabilities, who were in Chicago by and large. Eli wasn't, Eli was posing as he came back and forth from Vermont, but generally Chicagoans. And I was, yeah, you'll see what happens. Hollis wasn't part of the Disabled Artists Coalition collective. I had known her work for years before this. I had practically worshipped Hollis Sigler for the beauty and bravery of her paintings. She'd made her early career on images of lesbian desire. I'm going to skip a little bit. Hollis was the only contemporary artist I knew of who dealt with both impairment and queer erotics, both virtually unexplored in art of the time. In 93, I made a pilgrimage to Washington, D.C. to see the Breast Cancer Journal, Walking with the Ghosts of My Grandmothers, at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. I spent several days at her 1999 retrospective at the Chicago Cultural Center, watching as women inched through the exhibit with their hands stuffed with Kleenex, women who'd come back an hour later with a companion in tow. See, they'd say, do you understand now? After my trip to DC, I wrote a nervous postcard and invited Hollis to meet me for lunch. I managed to drop the silverware and knock over the water carafe, but Hollis must have been a fan of slapstick because she hired me for teaching jobs, recommended me to curators, even sent her San Francisco gallerist to see my work. Hollis's cancer kept returning just at the same time that my kidney problems were dominating my life. We took to calling each other from our respective hospital rooms. By 2000, she was on continuous chemotherapy, and her doctor said, no more breaks. My chance to do her portrait was fading, but Hollis was an artist, and artists understand that images outlast our bodies. Her yes was one of the most generous gifts I've ever received. It is 32 miles to Prairie View, Illinois, to a house half hidden in the pines, and behind that house, a garden that twinkled with fairy lights all year long. Holly had lived there with our longtime partner, jewelry designer Patti Locke. I'd first visited Prairie View a few years back and had been thunderstruck by Hollis and Patty's life. Their house full of dogs, their beautiful art, beautiful furniture, beautiful clothing, jewelry, flowers. Even the indigo of the night sky seemed more luminous than that over my own roof. They were my icons of non-sporty lesbian chic. I was devastated when they broke up. Now Hollis lives alone. The garden has been converted to raised beds that she tends from her wheelchair. She names the sprigs: basil, carrots, purple columbine. I'm afraid I planted the broccoli too early. It's so hard to know when winter is over. I whoop, Persephone, startling us both. Sorry, I'm lost. What are you talking about? I need to paint you as Persephone right at the moment when the seasons turn. Dusk has turned us into silhouettes, but her soft laugh says that she knows perfectly well which turning I mean. I set up a small version of my studio in her studio. The side of her face glows white in the clamp lights. Her assistant, Joe, gently ushers me out when he sees her flagging. I get on the highway as a full moon rises in the eastern sky. I have to pull off. I've never told anyone that the face in the moon is my mother's face. The moon changed the year that she died. There is no more distant comfort than Carol's face hanging in the void. I paint faster than I ever have, and Holly's face waxes in Hades' cave of night, except I know that she's waning and that the sky doesn't care how much I pretend. I unload the panel from the car. Holly gazes at Persephone, caught between the distant spring and the tunnel of winter. Pomegranates lie split and bleeding their seeds, breasts exploding their boundaries. And she says, she strokes her finger across the stalagmites and says, "It's wonderful. There's so much to look at." And 4 months later, I'm driving out to Prairie View, not to paint, but to help where I can. We are a team of people taking care of our friend, although I'm on the periphery, lacking the ability to do much more than fetch books and glasses of tea. An afternoon comes when she's in more pain than I've seen before. I blurt, "I love you, Hollis," as if that helps anything at all. And she gives me a glance of sheer exasperation. Yes, I know. She's had it with me. I am still and always a motherless daughter. March 29th, 2001. The springtime earth takes its due. Hollis leaves me the purple velvet suit that she wears in her portrait. I keep it in the cedar trunk that belonged to Grandma Fanny, nestled against Purim costumes of 80 years ago. And here, I hope, I'm going back to share. Let's give this a shot. And this is the subsequent portrait. No, it's not. There we are. Oh, okay. So that's it. And it's one of those paintings that was bought by a collector and the records were lost. All I know is I think it might be in Washington somewhere, but I have no idea where it is. But yeah, you can kind of see Hollis's very wry self-possession. I think she had mixed feelings about being looked at too, but she let me do it anyway. So
Thank
should
you.
we?
That was just it's special to hear about you setting up your studio and her studio, especially since the picture in the show shows her studio, which becomes a stage on which she's dancing. Um, and I think it was interesting, you said that Hollis Ziegler wasn't part of, your collective or kind of larger coalition. But one reason we included figures uh, such as Ziegler in the show was to, be inclusive when we're talking about disability and illness, in an attempt to, have a really affinity-based definition of disability, and to have it be something that we can all relate to. That's I think, the show is really wanting us to think about disability as being on a continuum and a spectrum of human experience. So I don't know that that's, such a clear question, but I'm interested maybe to hear you talk about your relationships with those who are kind of part of your, more of your disability art circle versus, others who you have reached out to, because I know sometimes you've done quite, high profile figures on occasion. So, yeah.
Well, like I said, I don't just work in disability. I know that's mostly
No, I know.
for, but I try and branch out into queerness because, big old queer here.
No,
And
that's a good reminder that, yes, of course,
I get forgotten, as totally forgotten as a queer artist. It makes me batshit mashugana. Like, hey, people, I was doing that before. I was queer before I was a public cripple. I was a public queer. So it's frustrating.
But
And
like you showed I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. But
no,
but a good example, if you show images again, is some of your most recent works. Like there's one of um two lovers in bed, perhaps one resembling you, but it's such a tender and amazing portrait. I mean, to your point about like, have there ever been queer representations of this kind? Um, it
not,
is so distinctive in that way. Yeah.
I mean, there certainly are queer disabled artists who are out there who
Yeah.
are making work. They haven't largely broken through, although there's a young man named, oh my God, he's on my Instagram. He's wonderful. He's doing uh, self-portraits of himself as mythological creatures. And sometimes I want to call him and say, hey, Bunky, you can be doing your work without me, honey. Like you could contact me someday. But he's a young and very gifted painter who's getting a lot of attention. Um,
Well,
who's,
certainly there are so many more painters who are working in this also like a storytelling vein, I think.
there aren't that many painters. There are
Yeah.
more people doing, from what I can see, installational work, um, uh, um, yeah, performance, a lot of performance in every venue, literature. I don't find that many painters. I'm always happy when I find somebody. Um,
Mhm.
there's certainly a lot of people doing incredible queer work, like
Yeah.
Clarity Haynes, for
Mhm.
instance, who's a big
Yeah,
hero of
exactly.
mine. Um,
Yeah.
but people bringing it together, not often. And uh, we're still not allowed to have desire, I think. I think
Mhm.
it's still uncomfortable for people to know that
Mhm.
we have desire and can be desired.
Mhm.
And, sex, I, the topic of sex within disability is massive. But to go back to your question about people within and without, um, it's not that clear anymore because, first off, the field is so much bigger.
Right.
And one of my closest friends is Tim Lowley, who I wish I'd been in contact with you before the show because he
Right.
deserves international recognition. He's not disabled. Well, he is now, but he's for decades he's been doing paintings and drawings of his daughter Tema, who is profoundly disabled, and the community has had an ambivalent relationship with his work because the whole topic of parents talking about their disabled children is so fraught.
Yeah.
And but Tim and I could not be closer colleagues. We've deeply influenced each other's work, and but he doesn't go to SDA. Back when there was Society for Disability Studies conference, like he wouldn't have gone there with me. I tried, but so it's people, it's we touch
Yeah.
different parts of the arc.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to make sure that we leave time for some questions before we have to uh
Go for it.
say goodbye to our so if there are questions in the audience, please put those into the Q&A chat and I will share them with Riva.
I am here to be questioned.
Uh
If
in
not,
the
I
meantime,
will
I'm
send
thinking
questions.
about what else I want to ask you.
Well, let me think about what we. Okay, so here's the thing. Going back to the medical issue,
Yeah.
there aren't that many people that I've met that are at the intersection of disability and medicine, because I had wanted to go to med school when I was young, and it was made very clear to me that it was impossible. Any place that you don't see us, it's because the venue has not made itself accessible. And so, you know, I don't know if I could have made it through med school, but it was a dream. But just recently, I did an event with a young woman named Samantha Schroth, who is a med student, 3-year med student at Northwestern. And when she was 19, I think she was on a vacation somewhere at a lakeside, and a dead tree limb fell and crushed her completely across her torso. And so she's a chair user. She got, she's incredibly driven. She was at one point Wheelchair USA, and then she got a PhD in immunology, I think, and now she's in med school. But we did a presentation for Northwestern, for the faculty and students lunch. There's a lunch lecture thing. And we presented together about what we call the crossroads, standing in a position where we could see,
Mm.
you know, both what it's like for medical people these days to be in medicine, and how incredibly hard it is now to be a doctor or any kind of care provider. It's much, much harder than it was 30 years ago. And at the same time, the disability community waking up to how we've been treated and how we want to be treated. And so working a lot lately on using art as a conversation. The one of those images, if I dare try and share again, I don't know if it's worth it, but I did a portrait of my doctor. Uh,
Oh,
do you
nice
want me
to
to
see.
try?
I think that would be nice to see.
Give
We
this a shot. All right, it's going to take me all the way back to the beginning
I'm
again.
sorry to do that to you, but I think it will be so nice for people to see a bit
Here's
more.
things here. Go back through the slides. That's Alison Bechdel.
Yeah.
Here's the piece that's in you. That's Tim Lowley.
Okay.
By the way, speaking of ethics, the center of my ethics is informed consent. And Tim had wanted me to do a portrait of himself with Tama. And I had to refuse because Tama is not cognitively able to give me, forgive me, I have to unlace my shoe. She's not able to give me permission to depict her. So as an ethical solution, I did a portrait of their relationship rather
Mm.
than, so when I talk about my ethics, they take a lot of forms, so this is one where I had to say no, but I wanted to say yes, because this is one of my very best friends. So, so
But
self-portrait.
those, yeah, but those constraints produce such amazing, solutions, formal solutions, because this is, I mean, this picture is incredible. And it's like,
Fully dimensional.
yeah, it really
The
is.
owl is completely a sculpture.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, a lot of my work has become dimensional, especially anything on paper.
Okay, right.
But and a lot of you guys might know Alice Shepard,
Yeah.
who's in the Bay Area and is one of our leading lights in multiple directions. Major theater scholar
Yes.
in Chicago. Achio Bayhouse, who taught for years at Mills, another
Oh,
Chicago or California person. Um, of course, Alice Wong.
this
Um,
this image is also in our catalog in Amanda's
oh,
essay. Yeah.
that's right. I remember Amanda had
Yeah.
asked for it.
Yeah.
So this is very recent. This is Stephanie Kielb. And Stephanie was my doctor for about 8 years, I guess, and saved my life multiple times. Her specialty is urology. Those of us with spina bifida often, because the lesion is often in the lumbar area in spina bifida, and the nerves that come off the lumbar innervate the gastrointestinal and urogenital and reproductive organs. And so if there are compromises in the innervation, then the organs themselves don't fully develop. And so you have all of these overlapping problems that are very common to people with SB. And so Stephanie was my doctor, and she had 300 patients with spina bifida alone. And that didn't even account for, the preponderance of her practice. But she was fighting with the hospital pretty constantly about patient care, um, patient accommodation, and finally how the hospital was treating the residents, because she was head of the urology residency program and had been for a long time. Really brilliant woman. And she tried for 20 something years to turn the battleship, and it just wouldn't budge. And she finally couldn't take the abuse she saw and the stupidity going on around her. And we were becoming friends while she was struggling with this. So, what I wanted to do was actually honor the experience of a doctor who was trying to be there for us, trying very hard to be there for us. So, in this piece, again, fully dimensional, these are emails that she got from administration that we printed on heavy acetate. Um, I redacted the names of her colleagues, but you can see the crappy things that they were saying to her. These are embroidered, this is embroidery threads. You can see the storm doesn't quite touch her. These, as we go down, the documents become documentation of her achievements in medicine and in relationships. So, like, for instance, right here is a little drawn version of she co-founded and runs a hospital in Rwanda because there was a preponderance in Rwanda of women having bad birth care and ending up with fistulas. And when you have a fistula, which means that you leak both urine and feces. And these women would be ostracized by their husbands, often be left, lose their jobs, be unable to do anything whatsoever because of the lack of medical care. So she originally was there providing care as sort of medical missionary kind of stuff, non-religious, and finally went, oh, this is bullshit. I should be just teaching people how to do this. So she founded a teaching hospital. So I did a drawing, and it's in this. I wish I had details of this, but this is a fully dimensional basket made of golden thread and jewels. And
Wow.
it contains all of, or a lot of the, like the lovely cards she got, certificates of achievement, um, just the warmth. And then I haven't talked about risk in my work. the next time, I guess I'll get to talk about the ethics of risk in my work. But I can tell you that here, these little pink scraps here, you can kind of see in a few different places. Those are my medical records. That's the most private part of my medical records, things I do not talk about. But I extracted them from her notes on my chart and transcribed them and then put them in the I guess that's the last thing I'll say, is that the other big part of the ethics in my work is how it can, making a portrait can be risky for me. And so I've come up, as I think you know, with a number of structures to make it genuinely financially, personal safety, emotionally, physically risky for me to do a portrait. And so in that case, I was exposing some very, very private text. So do we have any questions before we go back?
Wow. We have a couple of comments that I wanted to share with you. One from Cheryl Altstadt. I hope it's okay that I'm sharing that name. I wanted to comment on how much I have enjoyed tonight's presentation. Riva is an amazing figure in this space, art, disability, and shifting attitudes in the minds and hearts of those who don't know, quote, our world. 41 plus years as a spinal cord injury member of this excluded club, and slowly this club is becoming included. Thank you for Riva's role in making this true.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
then we also had a comment. Thank you for allowing me to attend this webinar, very informative. This is a large question, but maybe you could offer a couple ideas. What resources are available with regard to accommodations and finances for individuals with either a physical or mental disability with regard to higher education? I know there is more and more, so we may not be able to get into the details, but if you have like a lead you would like to offer, especially for, yeah, those seeking higher education.
There are more schools that, like I know at my school, by the way, I did retire from the Art Institute just not quite 2 years ago. I was there for 19 years. You know, there are a lot of schools now that are welcoming, or at least able to wrap their minds around accommodating people with impairments. They've long been okay-ish about psychiatric services, social services, but physical not so great. So I would say if there's an artist that you admire who either practices or teaches, see where they went to school and, you know, check out that school. There are grants. There are for sure grants. There's the Win Newhouse Award. There's 3Arts if you're in Chicago, which is specifically around artists with disabilities. There's more recognition in the large grant world, although after having applied for a Guggenheim 11 times, I might be just a wee bit burned out. But more of us are getting it. And Jessica Blinkhorn got a Guggenheim last year for her work. So I'd say look at where people went to school, look at what awards they won, go to their websites, and then work backwards.
It's excellent advice for anyone who is seeking to have a life as an artist or, you know, go deeper into any subject. And I think that's really helpful. And we're getting a response that says thank you. So I will conclude with that. Thank you so much, Riva. It is just delightful to be in conversation with you. I feel like I could talk to you all night. I'm sure everyone here feels that way, but we so appreciate you spending time with us and you know, even as we have changed our plans. So yeah, thank you.
Well, it was completely worth it. And Jill, thank you for making this possible. Thank you to the MCA. Thank you to, I don't know, my doctors keeping me alive so I can show up and do this. So whoever there
Indeed.
is to be thanked, I thank you.
Indeed.
So
And we have other thank yous popping up in the Q&A as well. So yeah.
well, you guys be safe.
Okay. Yeah,
Thank you.
lots of gratitude and yeah,
All right.
too.
Jill, I look
Okay.
forward to
All
thinking
right.
about
Thank
that.
you. And everyone who hasn't been to the show, 3 weekends left, please come and see Riva's work in person and buy and read the book.
Yes, please. I will be very happy if you buy my book.
Oh,
Thank you.
it's so good.
All right. Night, y'all.